No, sure. Yeah, we can have a bit of a chat. Do you mind if I record you while we talk?
Oh, by all means. I mean, is it all right if I do the same thing?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I mean, I'm not going to use it for anything crazy. And I'm not gonna say anything crazy either, so I'm not worried about it.
Okay. Yeah, hold on one second.
Sure, do you think?
All right. Go. Can you hear me all right?
I absolutely can hear you, just fine.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to first get to know you a little bit.
Well,
Hope you could tell me a little bit about yourself, and
I
why you decided to run for Congress.
oh, sure. Well, so for Congress, that's actually kind of an interesting thing. I live in Massachusetts, which is, traditionally portrayed as like a left state. Does that make sense? I'm sure that you know how Massachusetts is typically, viewed, but with all the history and everything that we have around here, like it's a very, very rich and old area as far as this country is concerned, and there's just so much that happened here. The shot heard around the world, the Tea Party itself, like all those things happened right here. And so even with the way that the general country is heading, there's still a very, very heavy recognition of why we separated from a tyrannical government, right? And that I think that influences a lot of people around here quite a bit. And so as far as Congress is concerned, I am personally concerned about many things. I don't like to say this as like vote for me because I'm a veteran, but as a veteran, I look at some of the conflicts that we're involved with in overseas, and I don't support them. And I don't think that we have a moral high ground when justifying our position for being in these places. And I don't see our leadership presenting this accurately to the American people when they're justifying our intervention in these countries. And I can be very compelling. Like I talk to a lot of people in my personal life. I study a lot of philosophy and politics and economics, and all this stuff just fascinates me. And so when people talk to me and I can resonate with them and they hear what I'm saying and they're like, I support this. This makes sense. And why isn't our leadership saying these things? It just seems intuitive for me. Even though the incumbent, this is a very interesting race. The incumbent is Mr. Seth Moulton, a Democrat veteran, very, very well liked among lots of people. Politico just wrote a 10-page article about why he should run for president in 2020. But, nothing against Mr. Moulton, the man or the guy, but a lot of his campaigning revolves around vote for me because of my service that I did for this country. And there's a lot of vague positions of his, and so I set out as a somebody who identifies as a libertarian, knowing that there's a huge democratic machine that's gonna, if he feels threatened, if his seat feels threatened, they're gonna come out hugely in favor of him. And in the face of that, I recognize that the odds of me winning are very, very slim. But to get on the ballot, it only takes 2,000 signatures, and I'm like, that's something I can achieve. And if in the process of achieving that, I can discuss some of these issues along the way and maybe get some attention to them, well, what harm can I do? At least we're trying to forward a conversation, and in the process, Mr. Moulton might have to solidify some of his policy positions in the meantime. I don't mean to go on and on.
What are those ideas that you're concerned about?
Well, so like, for example, Syria is very, very interesting to me, right? When I try to detach, when I'm trying to analyze our position in the world, and I detach myself from any, I say, okay, I don't want to look at this through the lens of an American who just believes everything that the media is telling me. No offense, I know you work for the media, but I believe that there's an agenda out there, right? So I try to detach myself from all the different things that are being said, and I become an impartial observer of what I believe is going on in the world. And so Syria is a great example of what I'm talking about. Assad, the president, does not want ISIS in his country. His country is being ravaged by this rogue group, right? No matter what your position is on Assad, it should be pretty clear that he doesn't want ISIS there. And so we have Russia, who is allied with Syria, right? They intuitively, using this logic, they are going to be opposed to ISIS. And I think that that's pretty well accepted in the media, is both Syria and Russia don't like ISIS, right? And it's generally, the United States is opposed to ISIS. That's our position, and I'm opposed to ISIS. I believe that ISIS is a dangerous group. But for some reason, our narrative for a long time has been regime change. Assad needs to go, right? And when I see, wait a minute, we have a regime or a president who doesn't like ISIS. We have a major power in the area who's closer to the region than we are, Russia, who doesn't like ISIS, and we don't like ISIS. Why can't we develop some sort of way to eradicate ISIS together and maybe work diplomatically to whatever the problem is with Assad in the meantime? And I just don't hear stuff like this coming from anybody. Does that make sense? As a libertarian, yeah. I can look at some things that Trump says and does, and I can say I support these, but at the same time I can be like, I denounce them. It's Mexico, for example. And I am very well, I don't want this to be simplified to like sound bites and stuff, but like Mexico can be justified as a legitimate security concern to the United States. And it's not because there are immigrants coming from there. It's just because of the general situation that's going on there, right? So when people say, hey, we have an interest in the border there, I can support that. But when I hear things like, well, we should build a wall and deal with it that way, I disagree. I look at things in terms of supply and demand. There is something that is causing people to immigrate from that region into the United States. And we should be asking the question, what is causing them to do that? And my take on it, my personal belief, is the war on drugs. And we to fight the war on drugs on a federal level, we will we'll send training and weapons to foreign governments who aren't as ethical as we are. They'll use this training and weapons to maintain their position of power wherever it is, and they'll fight the drug war at the same time. The cartels, in response to this militarized war on drugs, they also arm themselves. And the people that get caught in the crossfire are the people who live in these countries. And as long as this violence is going on, there's going to be a demand for people to leave that area. And the intuitive place for them to go is north, into Mexico, into the United States. And so I would suggest we discuss the war on drugs, but I don't see that conversation happening either.
But I mean, so it seems like, a lot of the topics you're talking about are kind of libertarian views of kind of the United States pulling back from, the foreign policy patterns it's undertaken in the past.
It's very consistent with libertarian values, yes.
Yeah. Okay. You clearly describe yourself as a libertarian as well. Are you running on as a libertarian, or are you running as an independent?
I'm trying to get on the Libertarian Party ticket, but even that's a process, especially with this rally, because I know that this thing is so controversial that I wouldn't blame anybody from wanting to distance themselves from me at this point. But I'm confident after this rally, because I firmly believe, and if we want to talk, can I tell you about how I heard about this? Would you mind hearing about that real quick?
Yeah,
so a couple months ago, I'm on Facebook a lot, obviously. Social media is very big in a lot of people's lives. I saw on my feed an event coming up. This was a couple months ago, a Boston free speech rally, right? And I'll be honest with you, I have no idea who any of the other speakers are or were. I've never watched Base Stickman, Cal Chapman. I've never watched Augustus Invictus, and so I can't speak for them. I have no idea who they are, other than what I've Googled, and I don't necessarily support what they have to say, But at the same time, like the type of person that I am, as a veteran, you can talk to a lot of veterans, like I will literally lay my life down to preserve speech because that's how valuable I believe it is to a free society. So I hit, there's, when events pop up, you can hit interested and Facebook will give you notifications regarding the event. Well, flash forward to last week's tragic incident in Virginia. All these additional events started popping up in my Facebook feed. It was protest the supremacists, deny the permit, I hate to say it, go punch Nazis in the face. I saw some really, really nasty stuff. But some of the more moderate ones who were like, we want to go and legitimately protest these extremists, I was like, I can sign on to this, right? So I hit interested on some of those groups too. I started reading through the comments, and a commenter asked the question, could somebody please provide a link to the original event that we were protesting to begin with? And lo and behold, a link was provided. It was this free speech rally that I was interested in a couple months prior. And I was like, holy crap, I'm not a white supremacist. I'm not a member of the KKK. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not an extremist. I believe in speech and in preserving that, right? And so when I saw this huge backlash and how the backlash was asking the government, asking the city of Boston to deny this permit for speech, and it really bothered me, right? And these speakers started pulling out. And when I saw that some of the more extreme speakers pulled out, I reached out to the group and I said, hey, if you're looking to fill some stage time with somebody who's articulate and willing to talk about speech and is going to denounce extremism, because that's the way that it was portrayed to me. I've been communicating with the organizers and they're really not extremists. I'm willing to put together a proposal for you to review and approve, and if you like it, I'll come up and say my piece. And they said they were more than happy to do that. And I mentioned, by the way, I'm running for Congress, but we haven't officially announced yet, right? I went to bed that night. I believe that was Wednesday night. Thursday morning, they had updated their list of speakers. I was now a headline speaker, like I was one of the 4 advertised speakers. And it said I was running for Congress, and that's how this whole thing just kind of blew up and happened. But I'm certainly not an extremist, and if I'm the only one there who's denouncing it, I'm completely okay with that.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, you came on to as a speaker, and since after Charlottesville and after kind of they readdressed some of these race issues that the organizers faced, or kind of the controversy they faced after Charlottesville.
So I honestly, in wake of Charlottesville and what happened in Spain, I really believe that this event should be we should really put a lot of emphasis on terrorism and how we can prevent terrorism by opening dialogue and keeping it limited to speech and not crossing the line into violence, because I see it from both sides. I see people in the protest groups talking about, forgive the language, throwing piss bottles at Nazis. And the Nazi that they named was Gavin McInnes. And I know he's not a Nazi. Like, you can call him whatever you want. He's not a Nazi, right? And so these people are advocating violence against somebody that they're labeling for they're not, And then there was that other gentleman, the professor, I believe it was, or the researcher who was misidentified at this rally, and his whole life was blown up. It's that type of rhetoric that I want to go and be like, we need to denounce this, and we need to encourage dialogue so that we don't have to, deal with these terror incidents.
Right. I mean, I'm also kind of curious about one of the other speakers, Kyle Chapman, for example, is known as Based Stickman, and I think, it seems he's only popular because he was violent as a protester. Should he have a speaking slot? I don't necessarily understand what he promotes. It's not a semi-violent agenda.
Speaking, he should have a speaking slot, but the line. There's a big debate that I'm seeing online about where's the boundary for hate speech? Like, what is prohibited speech and what is allowed speech, and what do we do once we cross that boundary into prohibited speech, right? So that's a very, very valid discussion, and I think that's kind of what you're alluding to. I have no idea what Kyle Chapman's going to say. Basic man, I didn't know. I haven't seen any pictures of him until a news story that came out yesterday. Okay, I don't know what he's going to say, but if he's not inciting violence, if he's not saying things to the tune of, grab your pitchforks and let's go march on the State House, or and don't if it's along the lines of, now there's room for clash within debate and clash of ideas, and if people have extremist ideas and they're ridiculous ideas, then it's for people like me and other reasonable people to stand up and say your ideas are unreasonable and maybe we shouldn't entertain you. But that's why we provide forums for these. I hate to say it. That's why forums are provided for people to say ridiculous things, so that we, reasonable people, can denounce anybody who's viewing this that might be thinking about joining their ideology to convince them otherwise. Our right to speech isn't so that we can talk about the weather and what kind of coffee we drink. Our right to free speech is so that we can discuss controversial things and move forward as a society without resorting to violence.
Mm-hmm. I mean, why do you think this event has been conflated with the Unite the Right Rally in Charlottesville? I mean, do you think that was mistaken?
I do think it's mistaken. I think that the timing of the rally does add to the rhetoric, and the fact that I don't know specifically who the speakers were, but I hear there was some overlap between the speakers at the rally in Virginia and the speakers at this free speech rally in Boston. But the organizers themselves, I don't think that they knew necessarily the type of controversy that this was going to cause. I honestly believe if what happened in Virginia last week didn't happen, this event would have been completely passed over as a non-issue. I really honestly believe that. Whether I'm true or not,
there was a similar event in May. They had the same event in May, and there was counter protests.
Yes, I didn't go to that event. I honestly wish I did, but there were counter protests. I watched a couple hours of video of that because I wanted to know what I was getting into. And it looked like a very, very small event. There was only 5 police that were separating the two different groups of protesters. And the protesters were coming right up to each other, and they were able to use their speech without it resorting to violence. And honestly, one side had a more articulate position than the other. The protesters were mainly labeled as so-called Antifa, and there was just a lot of swearing and nastiness going back and forth on both sides. But I would like, personally, my objective for speaking at this place is to not use swears and to not point fingers at either side or both sides. Maybe I can make fun of everybody. I don't know. I'm still working on exactly what I'm going to say, of course. But, I want it to be thought-provoking. I want it to be a little controversial. But it's certainly not going to be supremacist language. I'm going to be denouncing all of the extremist ideologies by name when I get there. And if they boo me off stage, whatever, I get booed off stage. That's almost the purpose. The purpose of speech is to forward controversial things, and to get people to think about why they may be wrong in their support for stupid ideologies. I just heard that the so-called local KKK is going to be there, and I mark my words, I will call them out by name and denounce them.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I'll be there too. So I mean, there's also now, since Charlottesville, thousands have said they're going to attend these 2 counter protests, one organized by Black Lives Matter, another by the Answer Coalition. I wondered, did you approach them about speaking to those groups as well? I mean, it seems like the bigger stage, and it seems weird that the counter protests are the bigger stage. These days,
my understanding is that Black Lives Matter. I honestly, I'm not an organizer of the event, and I just wrote down both those organizations the answer. I didn't know about the answer. I didn't know that either of them were going to have a platform for speaking. My understanding was Black Lives Matter was going to have a representative speaking at this free speech event. The organizer, I can't speak for him. My understanding is he's looking for representation from other groups to have their voice be heard on the same stage. And so it's open. And if I'm speaking inaccurately on behalf of him, I'm sorry. His group, Boston Free Speech Rally Group, the one who's actually organizing the event, he's been very good about responding to messages. And if you wanted to talk to him, you may even be able to get a hold of him. But if both Black Lives Matter and the Answer Coalition are going to provide opportunities for people to speak, I would be more than happy to speak to anybody who's willing to. And I did personally want to go around to all the protest groups individually on my own anyway, and personally speak to some of them, because I firmly believe that it's going to be mostly reasonable people showing up to this event, and they're not going to be violent. And among these groups, there's going to be a lot who are willing to have dialogue, even if they might not agree with what I have to say when we part ways. I think it can be done amicably and with respect.
And then I just wanted to ask, with these Confederate statues, a lot of them being taken down around the country, I was kind of curious what you thought of that and what you thought of President Trump's response in general.
All right,
to Charlottesville.
The statues. I served in the Army between 2005 and 2008, and the military is a very, very interesting thing where you get soldiers, you get people from all different walks of life, races, groups. They all come together, and they don the same uniform, and they have to act as a unified unit, right? And so you have African Americans, you have white kids, you have Hispanics, you have Asians.
Right, the military is one of the most diverse institutions in the federal government.
And so you take all these different people with their backgrounds and how they grew up, and we talk about it, right? And so I spoke with some fine gentlemen from Oklahoma and Kansas, where they grew up, and they said, they support the Confederate flag and some of the values that went along with the Confederacy. And being from Massachusetts, I'll admit I don't understand it, right? But the way that they put it is, the Confederate, you have to get into history a little bit, but the Confederate, the values, they were all about states' rights. Yes, I'll acknowledge states' rights with regards to holding slaves, but the people who grew up around the Confederate flag in our modern age, the ones who are from the South, they don't view it as necessarily a slavery thing. They look at it as an imposing federal government infringing, stepping beyond what it was originally designed to do to step on states' rights. And so, like I said, being from the North, we may not understand this and we may not agree with it, but I am withholding judgment from those who are willing to hold that debate without using violence. Does that make sense?
Sure.
President Trump,
yeah.
I don't think that, I think with the way that, unfortunately, things are being reported now, no matter what he says, it's not going to be good enough. So honestly, I don't follow him very closely either. I do think that a lot of the stuff that we see is for show, and so I try to look at our actual actions and what we're doing as a government, as the people who are doing the things that they've been elected to represent us to do. I want to know what they're doing. He condemned it. I'm pretty sure he called it terrorism. I'm not 100%. But I honestly believe that no matter what he says, it's just not going to be good enough.
I think people are upset about the fact that he said, at the right rally that, there's probably some good people, and kind of conflated that with the counter protests as well, which, there was violence there as well. But, the people's response, I think, is to him conflating the two sides and conflating neo-Nazis and KKK members with the counter protesters.
I won't defend neo-Nazis and KKK members, just like I won't defend fascists and the so-called Antifa, because I don't think that they're anti-fascist. They're resorting to a lot of the same tactics. But, recognizing what I know about these fine gentlemen that I served with in Oklahoma and Kansas, right? And knowing what they believe and knowing that they aren't racist and they aren't against, they don't believe in that some people are less equal than others, right? And recognizing that they still believe that the Confederate flag is a symbol that they support, and they look at some of these generals and they say, these are people that we look up to. Now, as I said, we in Massachusetts don't understand it. But I know that these guys aren't racist. And to label every single protester that was at that statue as a Nazi or a white supremacist or a racist is, I think, demeaning the experience and the knowledge of those people that I served with who believe similar things. So that's my understanding of what President Trump was saying. Just like the protesters, there are legitimate protesters who genuinely want to use their speech to tell these idiots that these Confederate statues should be taken down. And no matter what they believe about the Confederate flag, it's perceived as a symbol of racism, right? That's the purpose of debate. And there are people legitimately trying to do that. But then you have other ones, like the ones here, who are just threatening violence and throwing bottles of piss, for example. And that's what I think President Trump was trying to say. Was he saying that there are people with good intentions among both groups? And I hope that he wasn't. I hope I'm not being misconstrued as justifying violence, because that's the last thing that I would want to do. And I hope that that's not how he's being perceived either, because that's not how I saw it.
Right. And then, I mean, just taking a step back, I mean, I know what you said about your friends in Kansas and Oklahoma. I mean, what do you think about these Confederate statues? You're running for Congress. If there were any in Massachusetts, which I'm not sure there's a
debate about Faneuil Hall right now. There's a debate about Yawkey Way, right by Fenway.
Right, exactly.
And so,
where do you land on those types of positions?
As somebody who's running for federal office, I believe it's up to the states, and I know that's kind of a cop-out. What I personally believe is one of the best things that I heard is it costs taxpayer dollars to take down statues, right? And it costs taxpayer dollars to maintain these statues. If people were interested in actually talking about it, right, there are different ideas. There's like remove them outright. There are add plaques to the statues to add some context as to why these things were erected to begin with, right, which I believe educates people, or there's leave them as it is. And so I would encourage, because I personally, it's not something that's highest on my list of things, because when I look at our foreign policy, I look at our war on drugs, and I look at all these other messed up ways that people are losing their lives. And yes, people are losing their lives now over speech. I honestly think that there are bigger things that we should be talking about what our government is doing. But I would encourage community leaders and people who are articulate and willing to speak out without being ashamed of what they have to say, to go to the meetings when they discuss these things, because it's my understanding in Boston it goes through a public process where they're going to take in input and they're going to figure out the best way to move forward. Whereas in some of these cities, they're just going out and removing the statues overnight without any discussion or debate, and that's where I have a problem with it.
Right.
Did that answer your question?
Okay. It definitely does. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else you want to add? Anything else you want to say? Anything we missed or you want people to consider?
No, I think that I actually really liked our discussion. So if there's anything else you want to know, please feel free to get back to me. And there's a guy named Joe Biggs. He's another speaker there, Staff Sergeant Joe Biggs.
Right.
I'd never heard about him before, but when I Googled him, I found out he was a friend of Michael Hastings, the Rolling Stones reporter. Are you familiar with his story at all?
Mhm.
It's very disturbing to me what happened to him, and that's the type of stuff that I think that we use speech to talk about, and I may touch on that during my speech on Saturday. And so I look forward to talking to Mr. Biggs. I don't know what his positions are on different things, but I know if he was standing up for what happened to Mr. Hastings, then he can't be a bad guy. You know, honestly, that's the way that
Uh-huh.
I look at it.
Um,
So I appreciate you chatting with me.
yeah, well, hey, I appreciate it too, and hopefully I can catch up with you on Saturday as well.
Assuming I'm not chased out of there, I'll be hanging out
Yeah.
before and after.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
I will hopefully see you there. I
You as
appreciate it.
yeah. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye.